still think we ought to take the dice off now.
I think
For that drown people, we have to
I'll
drown.
down about 200,000 people.
Well, no, I'd rather use a nuclear bomb if you got that ready.
That, I think, would just be too much.
The nuclear bomb, that probably, I just want you to think big, Henry, for Christ's sake.
Bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose.
You and me, Max, we're gonna give them back to heroes.
This is the Godfather of cinema, and thanks for joining me for my analysis and personal interpretation of Oppenheimer, a 2023 biopic written and directed by Christopher Nolan and starring Cillian Murphy in the title role, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., and Florence Pugh. At Christ College in Cambridge, England, Danish physicist Niels Bohr gives a lecture on quantum physics that he claims is a brand new way to see reality. The embodiment of this metaphor is physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who can see the quantum world in his dreams and visions, and he is obsessed with making that quantum world a reality regardless of the consequences.
Now it seems you're ready.
However, in the present, he is seated before three men in a tiny room out of the public eye at a hearing to appeal the Atomic Energy Commission's decision to deny his security clearance due to his past dealings with communists, which began at Cambridge College in England, in which Niels Bohr gave a lecture on quantum physics. However, Professor Patrick Blackett would not let Oppenheimer attend the lecture because he had to clean up the lab.
Oh, no, not you, Oppenheimer.
A student had left an apple for the professor, and Oppenheimer injected it with cyanide and left it there and went to hear Niels Bohr's lecture anyway. But afterwards, a change came over Oppenheimer. He was no longer angry with his professor, and luckily he was able to take the poisoned apple away from Niels Bohr in time to stop him from biting it. Here, take note of Oppenheimer's lack of patience and the fact that he wants something that he is not ready for. Another thing to note in this scene is his change of heart by the end of the lecture, and also note how he takes the apple away from Niels Bohr to stop him from biting it. His change of heart in this scene is symbolic, foreshadowing his transformation later in the film that will be brought about by the death of Jean Tatlock, his mistress, and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But at this point in Oppenheimer's life, he is blind to reality and the fact that there are things that cannot be given and taken back as easily as the apple he poisoned to kill his professor with. One can be given a thing and not be ready for it. At Cambridge, Oppenheimer asked Bohr the same question that he had asked him at a previous lecture when he attended Harvard.
Yes, and you ask the same question.
And Bohr gave Oppenheimer the exact same answer at Cambridge that he gave him at Harvard. Oppenheimer did not like the answer when Bohr gave it to him at Harvard, but at Cambridge he liked it. Why? Because in the time between Harvard and Cambridge he had changed. Niels Bohr told Oppenheimer that lifting the rock does not make you ready for the snake that is under it. In other words, Bohr had given Oppenheimer something too soon, something that he was not ready to accept at Harvard, as Oppenheimer will later give mankind something that it is not ready to accept at Los Alamos. At his Senate confirmation hearing in the present, Louis Strauss is asked if he knew of Oppenheimer's past associations when Strauss served as a commissioner with the Atomic Energy Commission, or AEC. He had invited Oppenheimer to Princeton because he wanted him to preside over the school's Advanced Studies Department. Einstein was there that day too, and he spoke with Oppenheimer by a pond as Strauss stood at a distance and looked on. on. And when they finished, Strauss walked over, but Einstein didn't return his greeting and kept on walking. Strauss did not know what Oppenheimer had said to Einstein, but he was sure that whatever was said had everything to do with him. Why else would Einstein just walk right past him? This narcissistic assumption on Strauss's part made sense, being that Oppenheimer had just called him a lowly shoe salesman when Strauss told him that he started out as a shoe salesman. However, in truth, Oppenheimer and Einstein hadn't said anything about him at all. But it wasn't what Oppenheimer had actually said to Einstein in Strauss's mind. It was, however, what he thought Oppenheimer had said to Einstein, as it will be with Jean Tatlock. It won't be that Oppenheimer often left her that she will be hurt by. It'll be that he does it without telling her why.
You said you would always answer. You would always answer.
He'll leave it all to her imagination, as he did with Strauss in this scene, instead of giving her an explanation. As it will be with Russia, it won't be that America has a project to build an atom bomb that Russia will see as a threat. It will be the fact that America would try to keep the project to build the atom bomb a secret that Russia will see as a threat.
Now it seems you're ready.
Oppenheimer continues his story. He landed his first teaching job at Berkeley, and on his first day he saw scientists in the radiation lab next door building an electron accelerator. But when Lawrence asked him for help, Oppenheimer told him no, that he was not interested in helping them build the machine, but after they finished building it, he wanted to use it to test his theories with. Again, we see the same Oppenheimer who poisoned his teacher's apple, in that he wants to skip from 1 to 10 by taking his quantum theory straight to fission. From idea to fact, he is only interested in the finished product, but he is not interested in personal growth through the process of building it. He wants idea and manifestation, putting that idea into practice to happen simultaneously without progression.
Now it seems you're ready.
Again, the reason Oppenheimer liked Niels Bohr's answer at Cambridge as opposed to disliking it previously at Harvard was not that the answer changed, it was because he had changed. Between the time that Niels Bohr gave him the answer at Harvard and then again at Cambridge, where Bohr had explained to Oppenheimer that lifting the rock does not mean that you are ready for the snake that you will find underneath it, which also means that Oppenheimer did not understand Bohr's answer at Harvard because he wanted to understand it immediately, and he wanted to understand it too soon, as he in this scene wanted to test his theories too soon with a machine that he wasn't willing to help build, and through building to understand how the machine worked. Instead, Oppenheimer wanted to roll the dice on something he didn't understand in the hope that his theory would work in practice the same way that it worked in his mind. Back to Berkeley. Ernest Lawrence flipped out when he saw Oppenheimer in the radiation lab helping scientists there who were organizing to join a trade union associated with communists. Lawrence warned Oppenheimer that this association could keep him out of the Manhattan Project. However, Oppenheimer was not interested in the trade union or becoming a communist, despite having read all 3 books of Marxist capitalism and his affair with Jean Tatlock, who happened to be a communist, because as a free agent, Oppenheimer was tied to nothing, which was why he reprimanded a fellow scientist for expressing doubts about America's plan to drop atom bombs on Japan. As far as Oppenheimer was concerned back then, neither he nor his fellow scientists had a say in how the bomb that they made would be used on other people, and he was as detached from any personal responsibility for the atom bomb as he was from Jean Tatlock. As Niels Bohr told him at Cambridge, lifting the rock does not mean that you are ready for the snake that you will find under it.
Now it seems you're ready.
Because at this point in the film and his life, Oppenheimer doesn't understand that there are consequences for his actions. But after the bombings of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Jean Tatlock's death, he will see his role in those who are affected by his decisions differently. Also, at this point in the film and his life, Oppenheimer believes that his exceptional intelligence gives him the right to have an affair and a baby with a married woman, and being that he claimed to believe in candor and openness, he even told Kitty's husband so that he could marry her when they got divorced. And as the director of the Manhattan Project, he believed that he had carte blanche to recruit scientists as unstable as himself.
Now the race is against the Soviets.
Because building the atom bomb before the Nazis took priority over everything else, and why Colonel Groves put him over the Manhattan Project in the first place, despite the fact that he was a dilettante, a liberal, and a suspected communist. As I pointed out, back then Oppenheimer wanted to bring an idea into existence without regard to the possible consequences, like the scene in which he had casually informed Jean that he and Kitty were expecting a baby and getting married. Now, having a baby is not wrong, but having a baby with a married woman is wrong. Back then, he had no sense of correct procedure, protocol, or doing things in their proper order, a pattern of error that would enable Russian spies to infiltrate the Manhattan Project. And as he did not like the answer that Niels Bohr gave him at Harvard, the same answer that he later liked at Cambridge, and as he was not ready to see Jean Tatlock as anything more than a communist, he was not ready to take responsibility for the people who will die by the atom bomb that he created, being that he was a theorist who believed that the atom bomb was necessary, for mankind would not understand it until they used it, and it became as real as the role he played in Jean's death and those who would die in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Though he could see the quantum world in his mind, he could not see it in reality, nor the consequences of his actions yet, because it was still too early.
Near zero.
Note the parallel between Jean Tatlock and Colonel Groves, starting with Jean and the fact that Oppenheimer had used double entendre to warn her that he is an unfaithful man who is not loyal to any idea. He had read all 3 books of capitalism and yet maintained that he was not a communist. He told her that he was a free thinker and that he needed his wiggle room. On top of all these hints, he even read her a passage out of one of his favorite books, the Bhagavad Gita, and now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, a world that represented Jean's expectations and what she wanted out of their relationship, a conflict between worlds that would eventually obliterate her reality. As Oppenheimer rolled the dice on his theory of quantum physics, as Jean had rolled the dice by falling in love with a man like him, who let her know from the get-go that he was unstable. And then there was Colonel Groves, who knew up front that Oppenheimer was a security risk and that he was a dilettante, a womanizer, a Democrat, and a suspected communist.
How remote? Chances are near zero.
And yet, he still hired Oppenheimer to be the director of the Manhattan Project. Anyway, Colonel Groves admits to this at Oppenheimer's AEC hearing to restore his security access. Groves knew that Oppenheimer was unstable, but at that time felt that he could control a liberal like him anyway. For like Jean Tatlock, Groves didn't pay heed to the obvious signs.
How remote? Chances are near zero.
As Oppenheimer didn't pay heed to obvious signs that Jean Tatlock was unstable and a risk, being that she had been seeing a psychiatrist who had her on medication, and to make matters worse, she was even a communist. And still Oppenheimer deluded himself into believing that he could control the outcome. As long as he kept his secrets, he could manage her and end it his way without any consequences. He had no idea what would happen as a result of that decision, as he also did not know the outcome of the Trinity Test after calculations suggested that it could possibly destroy the world. Oppenheimer Oppenheimer went through with it anyway and gambled on the chance that the calculations were wrong, as he had also gambled by recruiting scientists from a labor union associated with communists. Luckily, the Trinity Test did not destroy the world. However, he would not be as lucky in hiring scientists without respect for protocols. Oppenheimer was not concerned about compartmentalizing or poor security on the Manhattan Project back then because he believed that his brilliance made up for all of his mistakes, because America was in a race against the Nazis to build the first atomic bomb and needed him, for why else would Colonel Groves even hire him after finding out that he was a dilettante, a New Deal Democrat, a womanizer, and a suspected communist, and allow him to bring in his brother Frank, a former communist? And why else would Jean Tatlock risk being his lover when he told her up front that he was not interested in a committed relationship? And why would Louis Strauss risk hiring him to be the president of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton after he had warned Strauss of the skeletons in his closet? And why would Oppenheimer take a risk that could end up destroying the world? After all, a chain reaction that could destroy the world should have been enough for him to cancel the Trinity Test. However, it wasn't. And when he took Teller's calculation to Einstein for a second opinion, Einstein would not give it to him due to his belief that God would not roll dice with the human race hanging in the balance. He left the decision to Oppenheimer, who did roll the dice, because he learned that calculations and theories were sometimes wrong, which is why when German scientists Hahn and Strassmann achieved nuclear fission in practice, he tried to do the same thing on paper but couldn't, because there were some things one had to do in order to understand, as he also believed that the world had to see what the atom bomb could do to human beings in order to ensure world peace. But what he did not know at that time was that outcomes are as unpredictable as the idea that he would be the trigger for Jean Tatlock's death. Back then, the AEC convened an emergency meeting after a B-29 picked up radiation from an atom bomb over the North Pacific, meaning that Russian spies from the labor union had infiltrated the Manhattan Project. Even though security was supposed to be tight at Los Alamos, it wasn't. According to Colonel Nichols, Oppenheimer and Colonel Groves butted heads frequently over compartmentalization and security protocols that Oppenheimer often ignored with impunity by knowingly recruiting scientists and their wives without security checks and by holding open discussions with all of the scientists together. Colonel Groves and Nichols wanted Oppenheimer to compartmentalize, but he refused, which caused America to lose its advantage over Russia, which is a metaphor of Oppenheimer and Jean's relationship. But unlike Russia, which had equalized itself with America, Jean had nothing with which to equalize herself with Oppenheimer, because she loved him, but he did not love her, because if he did, like two scorpions in a bottle, they would have been incapable of doing harm to the other without destroying themselves.
The Russians have a bomb.
Instead, Oppenheimer held all of the power in their relationship and used it against her, as America will use its power over Japan on the pretext of ending the war. Colonel Groves wanted to compartmentalize the Manhattan Project for national security, but Oppenheimer risked it to build the atom bomb faster and more efficiently, with all of the scientists working together instead of separately. And Russia used this lapse in security to create its own atom bomb. But Oppenheimer remained optimistic still due to his theory that America and Russia each had a bomb and had to agree to arms control, being that neither side could use its bomb without destroying itself, a theory that worked on paper and policy, but in practice, like fission, it did not work the same way, because Louis Strauss wanted to keep Los Alamos open in order to build a bomb that was much bigger, a hydrogen bomb, instead of arms control. Equal capability had created an arms race. From the very start, Groves knew that Oppenheimer was a suspected communist, unstable, theatrical, egotistical, neurotic, and disloyal. So why was Groves surprised that Oppenheimer's friend and colleague Lawrence would arrange an open meeting after Groves had warned Lawrence to tell each scientist only what was needed, so that no one scientist could know everything about the entire project? Lawrence agreed to compartmentalize the information prior to the meeting, but flipped the script and told them all everything, including what Groves had told him not to tell them. Again, this chain reaction was triggered by Groves' mistake in putting Oppenheimer over the Manhattan Project in the very beginning. This chain reaction continued to spread when Oppenheimer received word that his liaison at Berkeley, Giovanni Rossi Lomanitz, was still working with a trade union linked with communists. Oppenheimer had spoken with Lomanitz, who had promised to stop but hadn't. A rebellion that started with Oppenheimer had gotten out of control. The last time that he saw Jean Tatlock back then, he told her that he was moving to Los Alamos and could not see her again. He did not love her, and therefore he was free to leave her, cleanly and completely, without any difficulty or a single word. This is the same way that America will end its relationship with Russia after the war. Let me explain. Back then, Jean was Russian, that she was loyal and ideologically opposed to Oppenheimer, who was America, in that he was a dilettante and not loyal to anything. On the other hand, Jean was not like Russia, in that she trusted him and did not spy on him, for if she had, as Russia spied on America, they would have been two scorpions in a bottle, and he wouldn't have had the leverage to destroy her world, as America would destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki without any risk of retaliation. Niels Bohr had warned Oppenheimer at the Christmas party back then not to give the world something that it wasn't ready for, going back to the lecture at Harvard in which Bohr had answered a question in a way that Oppenheimer didn't like. Bohr gave another lecture at Cambridge in which Oppenheimer asked the exact same question and was given the exact same answer. However, unlike at Harvard, Oppenheimer liked the answer at Cambridge as opposed to the first time that he heard it, because he had changed in the time between Harvard and Cambridge. At Harvard, he wasn't yet ready to like the answer that Bohr gave him. Another example is Oppenheimer's first day at Berkeley, where scientists in the radiation lab were building a machine to accelerate electrons. Lawrence had asked for his help, but Oppenheimer refused, and yet he intended on using the machine after they finished building it. In that scene, the machine represents the interval or necessary step between theory and practice, as well as the difference between the way that he thought at Harvard and the way that he thought at Cambridge. This step or gap in time between theory and practice represents growth, change, and proper order. Back then, he wanted theory and practice to occur simultaneously without the understanding that only came with time, experience, and maturity. In other words, Oppenheimer wanted a shortcut. Like Niels Bohr said, one can lift the rock and not be ready for what's under it. Once America uses atom bombs on Japan, there won't be a way to take them back, as he had taken the apple out of Niels Bohr's hand, because once those bombs are dropped, all that will be left are consequences and regrets, because people change. Also at the Christmas party, Niels Bohr told Oppenheimer that a former student of his named Heisenberg had become a Nazi. Heisenberg's change is a metaphor of the risk Oppenheimer had taken in prioritizing speed and efficiency over national security in the Manhattan Project by recruiting scientists and their wives without checking their backgrounds. Heisenberg's shift to the Nazi Party is also proof that anything can change over time. When Oppenheimer met Heisenberg in Zurich, the man did not seem to have a problem with the fact that he was Jewish. There was nothing back then to suggest that Heisenberg would become a Nazi, as there was nothing to suggest that one of the scientists that he created would turn out to be a Russian spy, or that America would turn its back on Russia after the war. Come on!
bastard!
Or that Oppenheimer could go from not feeling responsible for the atom bomb or Gene Tatlock to feeling totally responsible for both, and yet he does in the present because over a period of time he had changed his mind. Oppenheimer saw Gene Tatlock one last time. They made love and he left.
Not a word.
It was supposed to be a clean break, and at that time he didn't feel bad about it, but that was back then. However, years later he felt differently than he felt before the day that her father called to tell him that she had taken her own life. Oppenheimer couldn't see before then that Gene needed him when he told her that he had other priorities and could not see her anymore because of these, and he can't go back in time and take any of it back, which is why in the present he is fighting to get his security clearance back. He had given the world something that it wasn't ready for, as he was not ready back then to understand what he'd done to Jean by leaving her that day without another word. And losing his security clearance will be like abandoning her all over again. He needed to take back what he'd given the world, as he'd taken back the apple he intended to poison his teacher with, to stop Niels Bohr from biting it. Back then, Oppenheimer and Strauss had clashed over technical differences, because Strauss wanted to build a hydrogen bomb, but Oppenheimer didn't, because it would consume too many resources. Hypocrisy on Oppenheimer's part, in that he had once bragged about the massive amount of resources that the Manhattan Project would need in order to build the atom bomb. But that was long before Hiroshima and Nagasaki opened his eyes, imagining the lives obliterated by those bombs as his coldness had obliterated Jean. Oppenheimer did not want to give mankind another one that was 1,000 times more powerful than the first one. Time had changed Oppenheimer's heart, as it had changed Heisenberg, who used to be a nice guy, into a Nazi. After the bombing of Hiroshima, scientists filled the auditorium at Los Alamos to celebrate their accomplishment. Back then, Oppenheimer stood at the podium and saw the devastation of Hiroshima and its victims. And as he was the only person who saw the quantum world before it came to be, he was the only person in the auditorium who saw the human cost of his success amid the laughter and revelry. He would not have understood this horror in theory. It was not imaginable. It had to be done for him to understand and fear it in reality. Cillian and others had warned him that the atom bomb was not necessary, as Germany had already been defeated and Adolf Hitler was dead. It was only a matter of time before Japan surrendered, as it could not hold out against America by itself. Oppenheimer's colleagues could not get him to see what they saw and join their petition against using the atom bomb, because he needed certainty. Like Einstein said, and until America bombed Japan, he would never see, as he now does in the present, that he was responsible for those who died from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as he was for the death of Jean. Prior to the bombings, Colonel Groves and Oppenheimer had went to Washington, D.C. to see the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, to let him know that both atom bombs would be ready by the 6th of August, and they all agreed that the bombs should be used because they would end the war and save lives on both sides, even though Oppenheimer believed that they had a moral obligation to inform the Soviet Union that their openness and candor would prove to Russia that America remained loyal, rather than secrecy, which Russia would see as a threat. This is ironic, being that America's disloyalty with Russia was also a reflection of Oppenheimer's dishonesty with Jean, and why their relationship was unequal. He had the power to hurt her at will without any risk of retaliation. Secrecy kept Oppenheimer and America out of harm's reach. Oppenheimer got a reality check. Prior to the bombings, Cillian and other scientists did not want the blood of the atom bombs on their hands, but at that time, Oppenheimer did not believe that they were responsible for anything. Though they created it, it was not theirs. And these words come back to haunt him after the Trinity Test. And as he had dumped Jean Tatlock when he was finished with her, America had also dumped him the same way. And when it did, he understood her pain when he told her he had other priorities and was going away. Like the Air Force officer creating the bomb, he completely ignored Oppenheimer's advice on how high to detonate it for maximum effectiveness. America was done with him, as it will also be done with Russia after the war. America dropped Oppenheimer's atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th and 9th of August in 1945, and Japan surrendered on the 2nd of September 1945. Afterwards, President Truman had invited Oppenheimer to the White House. Here again, take note of the change in Oppenheimer. Prior to the bombings, he didn't take any personal responsibility for the atom bombs he created. He closed a boys' school and an Indian burial site to build Los Alamos. He used Jean Tatlock and dumped her. Despite the fact that she still loved him, he did not love her. However, after the bombings, he wanted to close Los Alamos and return the land back to the Indians, and he felt personally responsible for the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as for the death of Jean. Back then, Oppenheimer was a contradiction. Though not a communist, he'd read all 3 books of capitalism. He supported labor unions but wouldn't join one. He was married and yet unfaithful. He created a weapon of mass destruction but didn't feel responsible for it. He played with the heart of a mentally unstable woman like Jean and dumped her. Oppenheimer's life now comes back around full circle. He had gotten the chance to take back the apple he tried to poison his chemistry professor with that day. Now he wished that he could take back from mankind the bomb that he created, and everything else he did the same way. Thanks for watching my analysis of director Christopher Nolan's 2023 biopic Oppenheimer. And if you liked the video, I would appreciate it if you would leave a thumbs up, a comment below, hit the bell, and remember to subscribe to the Godfather of Cinema for more quality videos. Thank you, and I appreciate it. God bless.